Hello and welcome, everyone. You're listening to our podcast, and today we're excited to talk about something really helpful for anyone learning English. We'll be sharing some of the best podcasts you can listen to for learning English. Whether you're just getting started or you're looking to improve, we've got some great tips and recommendations. I'm Emma, and here with me is Max. How's it going, Max?
Hey, Emma, I'm great, and I'm really looking forward to today's topic. Listening to podcasts is one of the best ways to improve your English. It's like having a teacher or a friend with you anytime, anywhere. Plus, it's an enjoyable way to learn because you can hear real conversations and natural English. We're going to talk about different types of podcasts and give you some ideas for finding the right ones.
Exactly, Max. The best part is that you can listen while you're doing other things. Maybe you're cooking, driving, or even taking a walk. It makes learning English feel less like studying and more like something you can fit into your daily life. So let's get started with some of our favorite podcast types for English learners. The first one we want to talk about is podcasts specifically made for people who are learning English.
Right. These podcasts are made with English learners in mind. They often use simpler vocabulary and they might speak a little slower than usual. They also explain words and phrases which can really help. One example that's popular is the English Learning for Everyday Life podcast. This podcast has short episodes about daily topics like going to the grocery store or talking to friends. And they break down the vocabulary and phrases you might hear in these situations.
Yes, podcasts like this are wonderful for building up your everyday vocabulary. And the topics they choose are usually practical, so you can apply what you learn right away. Another similar podcast is Let's Talk in English. This one's great for elementary learners who are looking for a good mix of easy-to-understand conversations and helpful language tips.
Exactly. They often give examples of how to use words in real sentences, which is super helpful. And let's not forget about Simple English News. This one is for people who want to improve their English and learn about what's happening in the world. They talk about the news, but they use simple English, so it's easier to follow along. Plus, listening to the news is a good way to pick up new vocabulary and understand how sentences are formed.
Yes, that's a good one. News-based podcasts like that are great for building vocabulary, especially around current events. You get to hear words that you might see in newspapers or online articles. And even if you don't understand everything right away, just listening can help improve your ear for English.
Right, listening often helps your mind get used to the language, even if it feels challenging at first. And if you find a podcast that you like, it becomes easier because you start getting used to the voices, the way they speak, and the topics they cover. That brings us to another kind of podcast that's useful for learning, interview-based podcasts.
Good point, Max. Interview-based podcasts can be really helpful because they usually feature conversations between two or more people. It's great for listening to natural English. One podcast I really like for this is the English Fluency Podcast. They interview English speakers from different places, so you get to hear different accents and ways of speaking.
Yes, and that's so valuable. Listening to different accents and voices helps you become more flexible with your English. You start recognizing words and sentences even if the speaker's accent is a bit different. And interviews also help you understand the flow of a conversation, like how people ask and answer questions or add their own thoughts.
Exactly, and it's like getting a glimpse into real conversations. You're learning English, but you're also learning about culture, new ideas, and how people express themselves. Another interview-based podcast that's a bit more relaxed is English Listening Lounge. The host talks to guests from all around the world, so you get to hear all kinds of English. And sometimes they explain any difficult vocabulary, so you're not left guessing.
Yes, that's a good one. And for our listeners who are looking for something more fun, there are podcasts that are more like storytelling or entertainment. These might not be made for English learners, but they can still be really helpful if you're looking to challenge yourself a bit. For example, the podcast Stories in Easy English is one I'd recommend. They tell short stories in simple language, so you get to enjoy a story while you practice your English.
Absolutely, and that's a great point, Max. Sometimes, even just listening to a story in English helps a lot. It can be more motivating because you're not just listening to learn English, you're listening to enjoy the story too. And by the end, you might find that you picked up new words or phrases without even realizing it.
All right, so let's keep going. There are so many different types of podcasts that can help you learn English, and you can choose ones that suit your interests and level. Now, in the first part, we talked about podcasts made specifically for English learners, interview-style podcasts, and even some storytelling ones. But there are still more options. One type we haven't discussed yet is podcasts that focus on culture. These are great for not just language learning.
That's a good one, Max. Culture-based podcasts can be really exciting because they bring you closer to the lifestyle, values, and customs of English-speaking countries. Plus, when you understand the culture, it makes learning the language easier. You start to see why people say things a certain way, and it feels more natural. There's a podcast called English Culture Club that's perfect for this. They talk about holidays, traditions, and even food.
Yes, English Culture Club is a great pick. They explain things simply, but they also give you some key vocabulary words related to the topic. So if they're talking about, let's say, Thanksgiving, they'll teach you words like harvest or feast and explain what those words mean in a cultural context. And then you start seeing how these words connect to the culture.
Right, Max. It's like learning English from the inside out. You're not just learning words, you're learning what those words mean to people and how they're used in real life. And for people who want to dive even deeper, there's English Around the World. This one is interesting because it talks about how English is used differently in places like the UK, Australia, and the US. It's like a mini travel experience through English.
Oh, that's such a good point. English is spoken in so many countries, and there are small differences in accents, vocabulary, and expressions. A podcast like English Around the World can help you get familiar with these differences. And understanding them makes you feel more confident, especially if you're planning to travel or talk to people from different places.
Exactly. Plus, you're adding a new layer to your language skills when you learn about accents and dialects. You're learning the standard English you might hear in a classroom, but you're also preparing yourself for the real English you'll hear out in the world. So these culture-focused podcasts really give you a well-rounded experience.
Absolutely, and speaking of real English, there's another type of podcast that can be really helpful, and that's podcasts focused on vocabulary and pronunciation. These types of podcasts are all about helping you expand your word knowledge and improve the way you say words. For example, the Word Master podcast is one I really like. Each episode, they focus on a few new words, explaining their meaning, how to use them in sentences, and even how to pronounce them clearly.
Yes, the Word Master podcast is great because it takes vocabulary learning step by step. Sometimes learning vocabulary can feel overwhelming, like there are just too many new words to remember. But podcasts like this one make it manageable. You can focus on a few words at a time, and by the end of the episode, you feel like you really know them. Plus, you get tips on pronunciation, which is super helpful.
Exactly. Pronunciation is such a key part of speaking confidently. If you're not sure how to say a word, it's easy to feel nervous or avoid using it. But when you get those pronunciation tips, you start to feel more comfortable trying out new words. Another similar podcast is Pronunciation Pro. They break down sounds, syllables, and even things like stress and intonation. And they do it in a friendly way, so it's easy to follow along.
Yes, and I think that's really important. Sometimes people focus only on grammar or vocabulary, but pronunciation is equally important. You could know a lot of words, but if you don't feel confident saying them, it's harder to use them. So podcasts like Pronunciation Pro help bridge that gap. They teach you to speak in a way that's clear and easy for others to understand.
Totally agree. And there's another interesting type of podcast I think some people might enjoy: story-based podcasts for children. Now, I know this might sound a bit unusual, but hear me out. Children's podcasts are often slower with simpler words, and they focus on storytelling. Bedtime Stories in Easy English is a fantastic example. It's aimed at young listeners, but the language is perfect for anyone learning English.
Yes, that's a great idea, Max. Storytelling is such a natural way to learn. And because these podcasts are aimed at younger audiences, they use simple, clear language. The stories are often short and engaging, so you can follow along easily. It's a great way to practice listening without feeling overwhelmed. Plus, the stories are often familiar, so you might already know what they're about, which helps you understand the language even better.
Exactly. Sometimes adults think children's content isn't suitable for them, but when it comes to language learning, it can be perfect. It's friendly, easy to understand, and often entertaining. Another benefit is that children's podcasts often have sound effects, music, and expressive voices, which can make listening more engaging and help you stay focused.
Definitely. And speaking of staying engaged, there are also some interactive podcasts out there. These are a bit different because they encourage listeners to repeat phrases or answer questions during the episode. English Repeat and Speak is a good one. The hosts give you a sentence to repeat, and they focus on phrases you can use in daily life. It feels like you're in a mini language class.
Yes, and I think that's a great way to build confidence. If you're actively speaking during the podcast, it helps you practice right away instead of just listening. Repeating phrases helps with pronunciation, and it makes it easier to remember new phrases. And because you're saying them out loud, it's also great for building speaking confidence.
Absolutely, Max. It's like you're training your brain and mouth to work together in English. And these interactive podcasts often focus on short, everyday phrases. So you're practicing things you can use immediately, like how to order food, introduce yourself, or ask for directions. It makes English feel practical and useful.
Exactly, and another thing I think is helpful is listening to podcasts that cover specific topics you're interested in. If you love music, find a podcast about music. If you're into science, try a simple science podcast. Even though these might not be designed for English learners, listening to something you enjoy can be motivating. When you're interested, you're more likely to stick with it and understand more.
Yes, that's such a good tip. When you're interested in the topic, you're not just listening to learn English. You're listening because you care about what's being said. It's almost like a bonus that you're learning English at the same time. I know a lot of people enjoy History in Easy English. It's aimed at beginners, but it covers interesting historical events, and they keep the language simple.
That's a great recommendation, Emma, and there are similar podcasts for all kinds of topics. You might be surprised by how many options are out there. And remember, it's okay if you don't understand every single word. The goal is to understand the general idea and to keep listening. Over time, you'll start to pick up more words and feel more comfortable.
Exactly, and listening regularly is key. It's a bit like exercising. The more you do it, the easier it gets. So, finding podcasts you enjoy and listening to them often can really help you build your listening and comprehension skills. And you'll notice, over time, that you start to understand more without needing to think about every word.
That's right, Emma. The goal isn't to be perfect, it's to keep practicing and improving a little each day. So, whether you're listening to a podcast made for English learners, a cultural podcast, or even a story-based one, it all helps you grow. And the best part is, it doesn't have to feel like studying. You're learning just by listening, which makes it fun and natural.
Alright, so we've covered a lot of great options, Max. But there are still so many more ways people can use podcasts to improve their English. Another type that's really helpful is educational podcasts. These can be about anything, really, but they're designed to teach you something specific. It could be history, science, art, or even business. And what's great about these is that they often have clear explanations, and they use language that's slightly formal.
Yes, that's a fantastic idea, Emma. Educational podcasts give you the chance to learn about a new topic while practicing English. And they often repeat key ideas, which is really helpful for remembering vocabulary. I've listened to a few science podcasts where they'll explain a concept slowly, then repeat it in different words. That repetition is super helpful for language learners.
Absolutely, and educational podcasts often use a lot of specific vocabulary, but they explain it in a simple way, which is great for learning. For example, there's a podcast called Simple Science that breaks down complex topics into really easy-to-understand pieces. Even if science isn't your main interest, it's a great way to practice listening to English explanations. Plus, you pick up lots of useful vocabulary along the way, like words related to nature, space, and technology.
Exactly, and for people who are interested in the news, there are some amazing English language podcasts that cover current events in a way that's simple and easy to follow. The Daily News in Simple English is one that comes to mind. They take big news stories and explain them in basic language, which is great for learners who want to understand the world while improving their English.
Oh, I love that one, Max. It's perfect for anyone who wants to stay informed without feeling overwhelmed by complicated language. News podcasts like this can also help you build vocabulary that's relevant to everyday life, because the topics are current and important. You'll hear words related to politics, health, climate, and so on. And since news is always changing, there's always something new to learn.
Definitely, and news-based podcasts are usually short, so you don't need to spend a lot of time on them to get something valuable out of each episode. Plus, because they talk about real events, you'll find that the vocabulary and expressions they use come up often in conversations and other media, like TV shows or newspapers. So, you're learning useful, everyday language.
That's true, and speaking of short podcasts, there are also many podcasts specifically for English learners. These are usually only 5 to 10 minutes long, which is perfect for a quick practice session. One I really recommend is called English Quick Tips. They focus on one small topic per episode, maybe a specific phrase, a grammar tip, or even pronunciation practice. It's quick and very easy to fit into a busy day.
Yes, mini podcasts are fantastic, especially for people who might not have a lot of time or who want to start small. They don't require a big commitment, so you can just listen for a few minutes each day. And because the episodes are short, they're also easy to re-listen to if you want extra practice.
Exactly, and the more you listen, even to short episodes, the more natural English will feel to you. It's like giving your brain a little bit of English each day, and over time, it really adds up. Plus, if you're just starting, mini podcasts can be a great way to build confidence without feeling overwhelmed.
Totally agree. And you know, podcasts aren't just for listening. Many of them also have transcripts, which can be a big help. With a transcript, you can listen to the episode and read along at the same time. This can help you understand better, catch new words, and see how sentences are put together. English listening practice is one podcast that provides transcripts, and it's such a great resource for learners.
That's a great point, Max. Transcripts make it easier to follow along, especially if you're listening to something a little more challenging. You can see exactly what the hosts are saying and even pause to look up new words. And later, if you want, you can listen again without the transcript to test your understanding.
Exactly, Emma, it's also great for pronunciation practice. When you have the transcript, you can read along and even try to repeat what you hear, almost like shadowing. This is a great way to improve your speaking skills while listening to native English.
Yes, and if you're someone who likes to study actively, you can even take notes on the transcript. You might write down new words, phrases, or sentences that you want to remember. Then, you can try to use those words in your own sentences. It turns listening into a more interactive experience, and that can be really motivating.
Definitely, and one last tip I'd like to mention is using podcasts to work on specific accents. For example, if you want to get familiar with British English, you can find British podcasts. If you're more interested in American English, there are tons of American podcasts. Listening to one accent consistently can really help you get comfortable with it, especially if that's the accent you're trying to learn.
Good point, Max. And it can be really fun to hear the differences in accents. There are podcasts like British English Conversations and American English with Culture that focus specifically on each accent. And once you start listening regularly, you'll notice differences in pronunciation, vocabulary, and even some expressions.
Yes, and that can also help you understand people from different places. English is spoken in so many countries, and there are small differences in the way people speak. So, listening to podcasts with different accents makes you more prepared for real conversations with people from all over the world.
Exactly. Plus, it can be a fun way to challenge yourself. Maybe one day you listen to an American podcast and the next day you try a British one. It helps you train your ear, and you start to feel more comfortable with both. And like you said, Max, it's a great way to practice the specific accent you're aiming for.
Absolutely, and I hope everyone listening today feels inspired to try out some new podcasts. They're such a fantastic tool for language learning because they let you practice English while doing other things. You can listen on the way to work, while cooking, or even just relaxing.
Yes, and remember, learning a language is a journey, so it's okay to start small. Just find a podcast that interests you and start listening. Over time, you'll notice your understanding and vocabulary growing, even if it's just a few minutes each day.
And don't be afraid to explore different types. Try podcasts that focus on grammar, storytelling, culture, or anything else that catches your attention. The key is to make it enjoyable and part of your daily routine.
Absolutely, and we're so glad you joined us today to learn about all these wonderful resources. Listening to English regularly is such a powerful habit to build. So keep exploring, keep listening, and keep practicing.
And if you enjoyed this episode and found our tips helpful, please subscribe to our channel and share it with your friends and family. We love helping you on your English journey, and we have more episodes on the way to keep you inspired.
Thank you so much for tuning in. Remember, every minute you spend listening helps you get closer to your English goals. So keep going, and we'll see you next time.